الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والعاقبة للمتقين، ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين، والصلاة والسلام الأتمان الأكملان على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. أما بعد. All praise are due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator, nourisher and cherisher of this universe. Peace, blessings and salutations be upon our beloved and august master, leader, Nabi Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Amma ba'd. Brothers and sisters, young children in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We extend a heartfelt and a warm welcome to all of you for taking out this precious time of yours on the Saturday afternoon. And we know that in winter we generally don't get a summer's day. So may Allah reward you all for coming and for your intention, inshallah. Without further ado, we don't want to go too much into detail in the beginning. To begin our program, inshallah, I'd like to invite our young Hafiz Adil Jada to do a short recitation of the Quran. He will be reciting from Surah Baqarah, ayah number 274 to 281, which is the most apt and powerful verses of Quran which discuss the matter of Ribah. Jazakumullah khair Adil.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الذين ينفقون أموالهم بالليل والنهار سرا وعلانية فلهم عند ربهم ولا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون الذين يأكلون الربا لا يقومون إلا كما يقوم الذي يتخبطه الشيطان من المس ذلك بأنهم قالوا إنما البيع مثل الربا وأحل الله البيع وحرم الربا فمن جاءه موعظة من ربه فآتاه فله ما سلف وأمره إلى الله ومن عاد فأولئك أصحاب النار هم فيها خالدون يمحق الله الربا ويربي الصدقات والله لا يحب كل كفار أثيم إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وأقاموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة لهم أجرهم عند ربهم ولا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وذروا ما بقي من الربا مؤمنين فإن لم تفعلوا فأذنوا بحرب من الله ورسوله وإن تبتم فلكم رؤوس أموالكم لا تظلمون ولا تظلمون وإن كان ذو عسرة فنذرة إلى ميسرة وأن تصدقوا خير لكم كنتم تعلمون واتقوا يوما ترجعون فيه إلى الله ثم توفى كل نفس ما كسبت وهم لا يظلمون صدق الله العظيم.
MashaAllah, Tabarakallah, Jazakallah khair Adil. Inshallah, we'll just go through the introduction, just do some adjustments to the sound, inshallah, with the antennas. Yes. So, Alhamdulillah, as we are all aware and understand the reason for which we come, and that is the dust of Ribah. Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam has mentioned, as you have seen earlier on, the hadith, that a time is going to come on mankind that you will be eating or consuming Ribah, and even if you're not doing that, then you will be affected by the dust of Ribah. May Allah protect us all. As this is a sensitive and important topic, they would certainly be questions that you all have on your minds, which you may have already come with, and you will have some questions that will pop up during the course of the program. We request if you could kindly make some notes of that and hold on with the questions. We will deal with those questions at a later stage, inshallah. And perhaps a lot of those questions will probably be answered during the course of the workshop, inshallah. As you see in front of you, we want to break it up into 3 parts from now until 4. We'll then take a quick short tea break, inshallah, comfort break as you see it. In this portion, we want to go 200 years back and see the development of money and how it has taken a different course over history, inshallah. Second, after the break, we then want to go and dig deeper into the Quranic sources and Hadith sources to understand the repugnance and the seriousness of the matter that we're dealing currently at hand. We will then break at 4:55 for Asr Salah, inshallah. And then we'll come back after Asr Salah for more hands-on practical case studies and workshop style, in which we will divide the brothers and sisters, inshallah, in groups. And then we have 3 segments to that as well, inshallah. So more on that when we come to that. Hopefully that will take us until 6 p.m., which is a Maghrib Salah, and Maghrib will then terminate for dinner. We will see later on, as we come to the end of the program, the appetite, and if there is a desire, we could possibly go slightly for a few minutes after Maghrib as well. May Allah grant us tawfiq, inshallah. Just right in the beginning, this workshop is intended to provide an understanding of the concept of riba based on injunctions rooted in the Quran and Hadith of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. We attempt, inshallah, to explain the role of money in Western monetary financial systems in modern history, create awareness. This is extremely important. As you will understand later on, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said that look at your heart gauge. We might get fatwa and stuff like that, but we also need to apply our mind as well. So create awareness of the deception that is prevalent around us today, and how we might be affected by the dust of riba. As we said earlier on, you saw the hadith, and if you're not consuming it, then you'll be living in a time when you're affected by the dust. And hopefully try and provide some practical solutions to stay away from riba entirely, inshallah. Keep in mind that we are not endorsing any financial institution or bank. We are not selling any or promoting any products, and we're not going to be attaching any pronouncing any rulings on any current products that are out there. The idea of the program is to instigate some thought within the mind and the heart, inshallah, and create this awareness regarding the topic of riba. Whatever you see in front of you, the slides, the notes, the opinions, etc., hopefully is based entirely on Quran and Sunnah, inshallah, and should be accepted in that regard. If you feel that we have erred, we obviously are human being. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us, inshallah. Again, we request everybody to apply their mind, inshallah, and may Allah bring us onto Sirat al-Mustaqim. And we encourage everybody to do research and consult with your ulama. That is of utmost important. Make sure you do your consultation. There might be mistakes, as I said early on. It's a very sensitive topic, and it's an ever-evolving discussion. So we could say something today, and then a few days later there might be a change in view, but in the masala or in the ruling, etc. So kindly overlook those areas, inshallah. And last but not least, before we hand over to Brother Muhammad Jada, Yunus, right? Muhammad Yunus Jada is originally from South Africa, in Heidelberg. He's been in New Zealand for a number of years, in and out, back and forth. Muhammad has at least 20 years of experience in the finance and taxation industry, and has been doing work on a very the highest level or senior level of the 4 top companies, KPMG, Ernst & Young, etc. So this topic is at the very core of his understanding and his knowledge base, and may Allah Ta'ala reward him. It is mentioned that min barakatil ilm an yudaf al-ilmu ila qa'ilihi. From the barakah of knowledge is that you attribute the knowledge to its speaker. So without a word of lie, everything that you see in front of you here today, from the outset, the conceptualization of the program, the setting up, the preparation of the slides, the execution, every single thing is the work of Uncle Muhammad Jara. May Allah Ta'ala reward him. I'm just here to give the support and to help and to come in where the Quran and Sunnah side of things are mentioned, inshallah. Likewise, Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu mentions, إِنَّ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ أَن تَقُولَ لِمَا لَا تَعْلَمْ لَا أَعْلَمْ. It is from knowledge that if you don't know something, that you say, I don't know it. So, a disclaimer from my side, and that is, I'm by no means an expert in this field, especially with the finance side of things. I have the broad-based understanding of what the Quran and the Sunnah mentions, and we will leave those intricacies and the technicalities to the likes of Brother Muhammad and the other ulama who are experts in this field. Imam Malik rahmatullah alayh, a brother came to him from very far off lands, from a very far off land, and the brother came with 40 questions. He answered 4, and for 36 he said, La adri, I don't know. So the brother went back and he was like a little bit disheartened, and he said, I came from so far, and the imam of the area the major imam, one of the four imam of fiqh, says, I don't know in so many masail. And then it was said that it is from ilm that if you don't know something, say, I don't know that. May Allah grant us tawfiq and ability of understanding, inshallah. Without further ado, I will then pass on now to Uncle Muhammad Jana. Jazakumullah khair.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sheikh Shakir is way too kind in attributing all of this all to me. It was through his guidance that we put it all together. So inshallah, Allah give us barakah in understanding in what we are saying. Please forgive us if we are saying something in a way or in a manner that may offend people. That is not our intention. Our intention is purely to discuss topics. The case studies, inshallah, for those of you who can make it through to the afternoon after Asr. I know it is a Saturday afternoon. I know people are tired. Inshallah, we'll have tea when the tea comes, it's on its way. That will give you a bit of a boost and an energy break. But the practical questions will come through in the period between Asr and Maghrib, inshallah. Before I start, very quickly, Maulana said I must tell you this. What was the genesis? What was the spark? What was the reason why we wanted to have a session like this? I've always in my work have come across reviewing a lot of contracts and checking whether the contracts are valid, either from a legal perspective, a tax perspective, financials perspective. And from time to time, contracts relating to Islamic finance products would cross my desk, and I needed to have a look at it. And in order for me to look at it, I needed to really understand what is the product itself. At first, I was very reluctant to even look at something like this because I felt I don't have the knowledge. I don't want to say or do anything to pronounce anything on something that I don't have knowledge on. But I was asked to actually give a legal opinion or an opinion on the product. And when I went through the contracts, which we normally do in many other cases when we do the review, you get to see clauses and contracts that are sometimes very surprising and eye-opening, that you would not expect to see in it. I've always had a doubt on some of those contracts, but at the same time, that started my interest about 12 years ago when all of these contracts started being developing, and to understand what is it that we are saying in terms of Islamic finance products. Mulana is very apt. We are not endorsing any product, so please do not take what we are saying as either approving or disapproving any product. We simply do not have the facts of any singular product to either say whether it is okay or not okay. Every single product has to be determined based on its own fact pattern. We just don't have the capacity to say one is good or one is not good. It requires research and it requires application and consensus in order to say whether it's okay or not. But what it struck me was there was a deepness, a yearning amongst many people to understand what is Ribah. So we hear it in the Jummah lectures often, and we hear it in the khutbahs. But what is it? What does Ribah mean? And as I started going deeper and deeper into what it meant, my eyes started opening up to what Ribah actually meant. And we always understand, or most of us understand, Ribah means interest on a loan. Ribah is much, much more than that. It is a philosophy. And it is a philosophy of equality. The saying of our Prophet ﷺ, a dirham for a dirham, equal for equal, on the spot, hand to hand. This is a hadith that if you truly understand what Rasulullah ﷺ, in the most miraculous way for me, that in the most simplest way he is conveying to us what we should apply as a principle to everything that we do. Dirham for dirham, in essence, Rasulullah ﷺ is saying that when you are exchanging money, it must be like for like. There must not be any difference between what you are exchanging when it comes to money or currency. And when it comes for equal, the principle of mu'amalat comes in where you should not have any oppression in the exchange. The person giving and the person taking should be neither oppressing each other or taking advantage of another. The equal for equal, the equality has to be in there. To me, and this is my lay views, so please accept my views as a lay person and not as an expert in this. Equal for equal is the actually root of riba. If there is equality in the transaction, then there must not be any oppression in either the person entering into the transaction or the person selling it. There has to be equality. Again, on the spot, hand to hand, what it basically means is when you're doing a transaction, do not leave it to a later time to conclude the transaction. If it is money, you do it immediately. You exchange it hand to hand. And we'll come to an ayat we were talking about, the longest ayat in the Quran, where Allah Ta'ala commands us that if we are going to do something and there is a time period in which we're going to settle the payment or deferred payment, we need to write it down. We will come across that ayat as well. Now, brothers and sisters, I know some of you may be taking notes and taking photos of the slides. Rest assured, those who wish, let us know. We will email the slides through to you, so you don't have to do that, inshallah. All right. The aim is to encourage knowledge sharing. Jazakallah. Bismillah. We've come across the hadith of the dust of Ribah, and what we aim to do in this session, this first session, and I'm going to ask Maulana and Adil to keep me very tight. Give me right until just before 4 o'clock. Just give me a heads up, please. I tend to get very passionate about it. I tend to go over, so please keep me under this. In order to do this, what we need to do is understand what is the system that we are actually under operating. We are living in 2022, almost 2023, in the year of Hijrah 1444. A long time has passed since the beautiful time and period of the Medina example. We are now living in an example, especially us who live in the Western society, that sometimes we don't even realize that what we are doing may not be what is actually what we should be doing in terms of the Sunnah. We are blissfully ignorant about it because we don't know. So what I'd like to do is to take you through a journey over the last 200 years in terms of what money is, what has happened in historical situations, and give you a flavor of what has happened to our currency and our money, and alert you to the fact of the riba that is currently existing in our monetary system that we are all operating in at the moment, if you permit me. So I'll try to go as quick as possible. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the late 1790s to the 1850s, physical gold and silver, these are actual coins, this was actually being traded, and they were used as currency, not only in the Americas, but around the world. So actual gold coins and silver coins were used. The ratio was 15.5 to 16 silver coins to 1 gold coin. That was the ratio that was attributed at that stage. So if you had to do a transaction, you had to pay in silver or gold. Not very long ago, 230 odd years ago, they were using silver and gold coins. So what has happened to where we are right now? And this is the journey I want to take you on through, inshallah. All right, in the 1850s, the Khilafat, the Ottoman Khilafat, they had to abolish jizya. Jizya, for those of you who may be familiar with the term, jizya is a tax that is due on all non-believers in a Muslim land. So in the Khilafat, they had to abolish jizya. And the reason why they had to abolish jizya is because they were owing money which they could not pay to bankers in Europe. And one of the conditions they said, in order for us to give you an extension on your loans, you abolish jizya, that we will not pay the jizya tax in your land. So this was the first concession. In fact, the treaty which they signed was a treaty of capitulation. Can you imagine the words that they used to even say that you have capitulated to us? It was a treaty of capitulation. This was a start, I would believe, amongst other factors, of the downfall of the Ottoman Khilafat. The Ottoman Khilafat had embarked on a series of major infrastructure projects, the most notable being in railway infrastructure. In those days, and it was a noble thing they wanted to do, is to connect places and people with railways throughout. So in order to fund that railway line across the whole of the Ottoman Khilafat, which ran from Turkey right down to the Hijaz and even into the bottom of Medina as well, they had to finance it somehow. At some stage, whoever it was at that period, may Allah forgive them, may Allah accept from them, they had actually gone and borrowed money from European bankers at interest rates of high of 16% in order to fund this. So let me just explain this, because this is quite important for you to understand. This starts coming through constantly, the same type of concept. The European bankers based in France and Britain, some of them in Germany, gave money to the Khilafat And they told Khilafat, you pay us to actually go and build your railway station. So the money actually went back to them in payment. And when they couldn't pay, because there were exorbitant interest rates, they started putting pressure to them, and it ended up in the late 1880s and early 1890s, where they occupied Egypt, they occupied the Suez Canal, and they also occupied the Ottoman lands in Turkey. So this is where a Khilafat was in the grip of Ribah. We now move on, and on the other side of the world we had America. America started minting coins. But the silver coins, the content that they had in the coins, they started minting it with less and less silver. So the coin that you had started having less silver in it. And they also then, in the 1860s, started issuing paper certificates. In other words, if you want to buy and sell with gold, we'll give you a piece of paper. The paper will represent the gold instead of you using an actual coin. So this is the start of the paper money system that we are happening. I'll just take you through this. And then in the late 1890s, early 1920s, we are all familiar, our grandparents, great-grandparents would have gone through it. There was a gold rush that happened all around the world. In the Americas, even here in New Zealand, in fact, the first Muslims apparently that came to New Zealand was in the gold rush in Arrowtown, where there were people of Chinese descent who came as Muslims and they came to mine gold. So we are all interconnected. So the point that I want to make in this slide is already 200 years ago, there was tampering of weights. And the fact that I want to alert you to that was in 1834, before 1834, a $10 debt could be paid with a silver coin which had with 236 grains of gold, for example. $10 was equivalent to 236 grains of gold. After 1834, you only needed to have 232 grains. So they started minting coins with less and less actual silver and gold content. So if you owed somebody, you had to actually pay more to settle your debt because your coins were not as valuable. And if you had a debt that you had to settle, but you had enough money, you had to pay less. Okay, so we go to 100 years ago, inshallah. Not very long ago, 100 years ago. We start with the war. The European War, I won't call it a World War, it was a European War. In that European War, it was financed by the UK, by France, mainly with colonial wealth, and it was financed with the proceeds of the gold and diamond gains that were found around the colonies around the world. What then happened is that money, that wealth that they had funded the wars. And the Ottoman Khilafat by 1924 was occupied, which meant that it was the end of the Khilafat. 98 years ago, the last remaining Khilafat ended. The start of its end had already started when it could not pay its debts. And that's an important thing for us to consider. In 1929, the stock market crash happened. This was a major crash because the United States had a fantastic run in the 1920s. Everybody was getting into the market. If those of you who did English literature, you would have read The Great Gatsby, where everybody wanted to get rich quick. History teaches us lessons. It's up to us to learn these lessons as we go through. What happened is, after that, the rush and the frenzy to buy stocks on the stock market, everything came down and started crashing. They went into a depression, and there was a run on the banks. What does a run on the banks mean? It means people did not trust that the bank would be able to pay back the money that they had in the bank. So they went to the bank and said, please give me my money. The banks didn't have the money. And so in 1933, it was the beginning of the end of the USA gold standard. In other words, the United States used to have gold that was exchangeable. And at that stage, all private gold in the United States was nationalized. It was taken over. Only the governments could have gold. You could buy jewelry, but if you had to have actual gold, it was nationalized. This happened, and they nationalized it at $20 an ounce. What they then did is by 1934, the situation got so bad, they changed it and they said, we'll only give you, you'll have to pay $35 to get the same weight in gold. And so what we see now is 100 years ago, there was tempering of price. People were fiddling around with the price of gold, and for the same value of gold, you had to end up paying more. So if you had to pay a paper debt, it was 40% cheaper for the person who had money, and the person who didn't have money, it was 40% more expensive. Remember, we went back to the maximum we started off, equal for equal. Is there oppression in the transaction or not? Right. This is the United States $10 gold note, $10 note, and this is 1928. In there it says the actual paper was redeemable in gold on demand. So you could go with this $10 note, go to the bank, and tell them I want my gold. By 1934, not very long after, they had removed the reference to gold. So you could not get your gold back. They will give you money that is in lawful money. Somebody even asks, what is lawful money? They'll say, well, if you give me $10, I'll give you $5 back. But you couldn't get your gold. And now it doesn't even refer to lawful money. All it says is this is legal tender for debts, public and private. All right. So this is the start of riba in money. Riba, if you look at the definition of it being oppression, there is oppression in currency. There is oppression in the money that you are having. So we move on to the 1930s now. Very quickly, we have the war, and the new European monetary system kicked in 1944. In 1944, there was an agreement called the Bretton Woods Agreement. Now, why is it relevant to us? Well, it totally changed what happened in terms of the relationship between nation states. What it said was only US dollars would be redeemable as a currency for gold. In other words, you couldn't use Turkish lira or Indian rupee or any other currency to buy or sell gold. You've got to base the reference price of gold in US dollars. Okay. And what then did is you had to go to a central bank to redeem the gold. Before that, there was markets everywhere. You could go to a goldsmith and get money. Now you couldn't because it now had to go through the central bank. It was centralization of the bank. The United Nations was then established. The International Monetary Fund was established in 1944. This was after the major global wars. And as part of it, if you had to become a member of the IMF, a quarter of all your nation's gold had to be deposited with the US Fed. You've got to take your physical gold, take a quarter of it, and send it to the United States. You also had to report all of the gold reserves that you have in your country to the United States. And we now see that we are moving away from gold and silver very squarely to paper money. But the source that backs up that paper money is now being centralized in one location. In 1948, we know the United Nations creates the State of Israel. We know the World Health Organization is established in 1948. And the US Marshall Plan is then put together in order to give aid to Europe to rebuild of $13 billion. Now bear in mind, if you look at the economies at that time, $13 billion did not exist in gold. But they gave aid of $13 billion in notes, in paper. So what we've seen here is, I would describe this period of time as tampering with sovereignty. And the more important thing I want to say is, we lost the Khilafat in 1924 when the rule of Allah was the ultimate law. We now have nation states signing up to be members of the United Nations. And by members of the United Nations, what it means is that the United Nations Charter is your ultimate law that you follow. Okay. We go quickly to the 1950s and the 1960s. I'm just conscious of time, I'm going to try to go quickly. So in the 1950s, countries started building up reserves. Instead of building up gold in their reserves, in their Baitul Mal, they started building paper money reserves, no longer gold. In the 1960s, inflation started going up. Why? You started issuing paper, but it wasn't matching the amount of actual gold. The gold standard was still around, and it supposedly would still be based on paper. So whatever paper was printed, we had the gold to back it up. Then the United States went into the Vietnam War, and it cost a lot of money. Now, in order to fund that, 168 billion was spent over 10 years or so. And in today's money's worth, the fact that we're even saying in today's money's worth tells you about what's happened to value of money. They would have spent the equivalent of $1 trillion in fighting in Vietnam. But the problem was, France and Spain realized that the United States are spending so much money on war by financing it through paper that they said, please send us our gold back. So they went and made a request to send us our gold, and they got about $300 to $400 million worth of their gold in physical gold back. They sent their warships, they got it, and they started bringing it back. So what happened was the United States started getting worried. Their deficit, which basically means that they are spending more than what they are earning, it's a loss, we call a deficit. It all legally still had to be payable in gold. So if somebody went and says, I've got this paper money, you still have to give me, the nation states could get their money back in gold. And the gold supply was only $15 billion at that stage. So they only had $15 billion, and they had a loss of $3 billion. So if you were other nation states, you'd be saying, my money is not safe. So what happened is in 1965, the United States stopped minting completely silver coins. It started introducing copper and nickel coins. You all heard of a nickel. So we remember we had from a silver coin which had silver, pure silver, then it went less. Now we got to a stage where the coins are made of copper and nickel. So even the coins that you are using are not worth the original value that it used to be. 1967, we have the Arab-Israeli War. In 1968, the United States rejects France's proposal. Now, what did France do? France wasn't happy with what the United States was doing. At that time, we had President de Gaulle in place in France. So what he did was, he said that we need to go back to gold. United States, in simple terms, you are spending more than what you earn. You should stop spending and stop printing money. Technically, what they are saying is, control your spending because you are devaluing your currency. You can't back it up with gold. And please, let's go back to the gold standard. This is what France was insisting on. Do you think the United States would have complied at that stage? So what happened? And just want to, on the left-hand side, what happens is when your currency is overvalued in general economics, when your currency is overvalued, people then sell your currency because it's not anymore worth anything, and they replace it with something else. So nation states would say, we take your US dollars and give us our gold. And because we have less gold, and because gold is still used as the balance of how much you can spend in the economy, you are forced as a government to spend less. Make sense? Okay? And that means you spend less, so your currency starts appreciating again. In other words, it's no longer overvalued because you're now controlling how much you're spending. By going back to gold, United States spending would have been kept in check. Unfortunately, what happened is that would mean that both the US and the UK would not be able to pay its debts. They simply didn't have the gold reserves. They had printed too much money by that time. So what happened was, instead of the United States being bankrupt, because when somebody owes something and you can't pay, what happens to that person? You lose. You have a fire sale, and then you start fresh. The United States didn't happen to them. What they did, this is 1970, so 50 years ago, I'm sure we had people who were born in the 50s. Not 100 years ago, but at least in the 50s, somebody was born in the 1970s, or was alive then. Subhanallah. This is the birth of what you call fiat money, paper money. In other words, being backed up by nothing. No gold reserves, nothing. It's just issued by a government and you must take it at that face value. The term fiat, if you're asking what is fiat, fiat is a Latin term which means an edict or law that somebody passes. So we pass a fiat or law, we say we are passing a law that this is the money that you use. That's where paper fiat money comes in. Do you guys understand what fiat money is? Yeah. So what happened is France sends a warship to the US. It's parked off in the harbor in New York, and it says, give us our gold. It was a standoff. If you go and read the history of it, they've unembargoed all the top-class secret classified cables. You can actually find and see the cables that were flying around between France and the US at that stage. So President Nixon announces on this day, 15th of August 1971, that the US would not convert dollars at the official exchange rate. So remember, the official exchange rate was $35. Says we're no longer going to convert it at $35. So what would you do if you were a country that you were expecting to get your gold? You'd be really worried, wouldn't you? What they did is they entered into an agreement whereby the US officially devalued the currency from $35 to $38. So in other words, for each troy ounce of gold, you now have to pay more. And the other countries' currencies went up. How did it go up? It's because we're now dealing with paper currency system. Your 1 British pound could buy more dollars than what it could previously, because they've now agreed to decrease the value of their US dollar. How did they do it? They regulated the price of gold. Why? The US dollar was backed and linked to gold. 1973, there's an updated agreement, and they officially devalued again from $38 to $42. So if you want to buy 1 ounce of gold, before it was, remember, $20, then it went to 35, then 38, now it's costing you $42 to buy gold. What's happening to the value of your US dollar? It's going down. This is something that, and also they said that you could not get physical gold anymore. 1973, they said you can't get any gold whatsoever, whether you're a nation state or an individual. Is this equal for equal? No. So now, 1973, the Arab-Israeli war started. Immediately, some of the Arab countries put an oil embargo. They said, we will not sell oil to you, or if we do sell oil, it will have to be at inflated prices. Why? Because you are fighting with Arabs in the Arab-Israeli war in 1973, and that was involved Egypt, Jordan, Transjordania at that stage, a few other of the Arab countries. And the price of oil rose from $3 to $12. So we all know the pinch when we go and pull up petrol now. Imagine it went 400% up. This happened in the 1970s. Can you imagine what it did to the US dollar, the US economy? This was a threat to the US economy. So what then happened is a masterstroke of political expediency and diplomacy. You've all heard of Henry Kissinger? He was the Secretary of State for the United States in the 1970s. He started doing shuttle diplomacy. In other words, he started flying off to Saudi, to Israel, and to a whole lot of different areas, trying to construct a deal. And he knew that he had to protect the American economy, and he knew that the only way he could protect the economy is to get the oil embargo to stop, and secondly, with a masterstroke. I call it a masterstroke because there's no way you could actually negotiate something like that unless you had a preconceived idea of what you wanted to do. He got King Faisal to agree that Saudi Arabia would only sell gold in US dollars. It would never sell it in any other currency. It would only sell it in US dollars. So what if gold could only be, if oil could only be sold in Sri Lankan rupee, do you think Sri Lanka would ever go bankrupt? And this is where we are right now. The birth of the petrodollar started in 1973. That's a picture of King Faisal. May Allah accept him. I'm sure he did the best for his people at the time. We are not there. We don't know what the situation was when he did it. And on the picture, the person on the other side is Henry Kissinger. He's still alive, by the way, and he's still giving political advice to what to do in Ukraine. And this is where we come to a situation of this graph. What this graph shows is not only that oil being sold in the US dollars, but he had made a deal that when we pay you US dollars for oil, you will now invest back into the US and buy US treasuries. So for those of you who don't know, a US treasury is like a government bond they give out. They say you buy the treasury, it's as if you are lending money to the US government, and the US government is going to pay you interest on it. So these are all of the oil producing countries that have invested in US treasuries since the 1970s. If you add it up, it's over almost $500 billion of investment by the oil producing countries back into the United States in US financial treasuries. So I ask you right now, before we even go into the definition of riba, is a treasury or a bond where you earn interest halal or haram? But our countries, I say our because we have an affinity to people who are Muslims always, they are investing the gains of their natural resources back into haram. What can come out of this, good or not good? We ask Allah to accept us and to change it to our own condition, inshallah. And I'm going to ask Mulana to go into the next slide and to talk about the reference to making halal what Allah made haram, whether it is shirk. Inshallah.
In Surah At-Tawbah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, اتخذوا أحبارهم ورهبانهم أربابا من دون الله والمسيح ابن مريم وما أمروا إلا ليعبدوا إلها واحدا. So where the slide says that making halal what Allah made haram, when just open up that Sahabi came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he was wearing in one riwayah says a cross that was made out of silver, and another riwayah says a cross that was made out of gold. And Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, remove this idol from your neck because they worship so they have taken they worship their rabbis and their monks. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was asked by the Sahabi, Rasulullah, they would not worship their rabbis and their monks. So then Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to them, yes, اتخذوا أحبارهم ورهبانهم أربابا من دون الله. What did they do? كانوا إذا أحلوا لهم شيئا استحلوه وإذا حرموا عليهم شيئا حرموه. So when the monks and the rabbis kept on interpolating the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and feeding it down to the people, they did not challenge that and they followed that. And so indirectly what they would do is they are actually worshipping the rabbis and the monks. So thereby making halal what Allah ta'ala has made haram. So this comes from ayah in Surah At-Tawbah. Bala, that's what Rasulullah said. إِنَّهُمْ حَرَّمُوا عَلَيْهِمُ الْحَلَالِ. They made haram what was halal. وَأَحَلُّوا لَهُمُ الْحَرَامِ. And they made haram what was halal. فَاتَّبَعُوهُمْ فَذَلِكَ عِبَادَتُهُمْ إِيَّهُمْ. People then followed their rabbis and their monks. And this is exactly the ibadat of the people of their monks. So we need to, like the description of Muhammad got there, shirk wrote. We need to be cautious of unwittingly committing shirk. And the Nabi ﷺ has also reminded us of a shirk al-khafi, the very soft shirk which we cannot perceive. One is shirk we all know about, and shirk which we cannot perceive. It has different formats. We will be answerable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for our every action. And that's why we need to be aware of the aspect of riba. We're living in times when the situation that the hadith was referring to is prevalent. This means we need to exercise caution in what we do and how we conduct our financial affairs. Because we are all somewhat linked to a conventional banking system, and in their clauses there may be something that we're signing on. Although we may not be directly doing that haram, but just signing on that document could be making us we could be falling under the dust of riba. So a healthy dose of skepticism combined with consultation with the ulama is indeed needed. May Allah grant us hidayah.
I've just been told that I need to make quick, so I'll try to go quicker as well. So we're now in the 1980s. So I'll try to go quick, and please forgive me because there's a lot that happened since the 1980s. So the USA and the Western monetary system, they started restricting trading of oil. So oil now functions as gold on behalf of the American dollar. You didn't need gold to be backed up in your reserves. You had oil, but as long as you're selling oil and you're basing the sale on US dollars, you didn't need any more gold. And as long as there's oil in the world, how much can the US print money? Is there any limit? No. So, the paper money is no different to what I call monopoly money. This is my view. Please, this is just my view. Alright, it's then fed into the Western, just follow this, it's fed into the Western banking system. So the central bank prints money. The central bank then takes it and borrows it or lends it to what I call Wall Street banks. We've got the Australian banks and one Kiwi bank here. So the central bank gives the money to them. They then go and they lend it out to someone else. So what was the source of the wealth that is circulating in the economy? Printing of money. Is it backed up by anything? Hardly. All right, so just follow the system that we are working with right now. So in 1980s, it was also called a decade of greed. You know, they used to say greed is good. I'm sure many of you, the youngsters, would have watched Wolf of Wall Street and all of those type of movies. Right? Greed is good. Excess is there. What is the path of Islam? Moderation. The Cold War kicked off. In 1989, guess what? After greed, what followed? The US stock market crashes. Did we hear of the crash about 60 years ago? 1929. Also following a period of greed. So, I call this the Great Scam. This is just my view, please. I call it the Great Scam because countries no longer can get their gold reserves back from the US Fed. The US and the EU uses what I call economic warfare or development state financing, where it lends to poor countries huge United States dollar denominated loans for industrial projects. So it gives them the huge loans and it tells them, as part of the deal, you have to use our people to do the work in your country. So the money goes to them and then comes back to them at inflated prices. And guess what? Most of them, either the project is not completed or not done properly, or it's inflated, there's cost blowouts. The project doesn't get happen. They have to what? Borrow less or more? More. And when they borrow more, what happens? Who are you indebted to? Who will you not call to account? The person you owe, you will never call that person to account if that person is being an aggressor. Is it equal for equal? So, my question now is, what happens when you can't pay? We all know what happens when an individual can't pay, but what happens when a country can't pay? We'll come back to that. Just remember, Sri Lanka has already gone through that at the moment as we're experiencing. In 1990, wars continue. We all started watching wars on the television screen. The first time we started seeing Baghdad being bombed. So where was all of these wars been financed from or been funded from? There was no gold that backed up financing the army. It was debt that was printed by the United States and its allies that allowed them to go and issue more and more debt, print more and more money to start selling more and more or to start procuring more and more armaments. Your scale no longer was small, your scale is that big, huge. So the financial sector, the financial industry, it grows from strength to strength. By the 1990s, it accounts for 25% of the economy. Sometimes some people say it's close to 35 to 40% now currently. So if you look at an economy, you have producers, you have people who grow things and sell things, you have people who trade things, and these are all people who are productive. They are buying and selling things. Then you have the financial system, which is purely based on circulation of money. That sector has now grown close to 30%. So a third of your economy is now based on financial sector services. It's the fastest growing sector in the economy around the world. It employs a lot of people, including our own children. So the Western and NATO military bases are established globally. Funded by what? I ask you the question. In Turkey, in the lands of Sham and in Hijaz, and even on the borders of Medina. Palestine still continues. We now go to the early 2000s. Just 20 years ago, China becomes the manufacturer of the world. They are the factory of the world. Why? Because greed is good. We want it to cost the lowest. We don't care what the quality is. We want it to cost the lowest. And if one country can manufacture it at the lowest price, we'll outsource everything. Is this part of Allah's design? Just ask yourself, what is Allah Ta'ala teaching us in this period of globalization? We also see the rise of the venture capitalists, hedge funds, sovereign funds, and private equity funds. They're all doing speculative investments. So 100 years ago, it was nation states doing this. Now we've got private groups doing this and private individuals doing this. Why? Because they have earned unseen and obscene amounts of wealth that they can do it, which are funded through what? Finance. They want to do a deal, you get a finance from your bank and you use it. As long as the deal is good, you got the finance. In early 2001, we've got the dot-com tech crash. I hope nobody lost money that then. All right. There's another one coming, by the way. All right. The bubble crashed on the stock market. Many speculators lost money, including pension funds that invested in these stocks. In September 2001, we all saw the Twin Towers. So those of us who were alive then saw it. And the war on terror started for the next 20 years. All financed by printing more and more what I call Ribah-based money from the US Fed. Who knows how much money was spent? We'll come back to that. Just think about how much spent was in the war on terror.